The unwilled mind, cognitive agency, default worlds, and the politics of inner freedom. Thinking isn't something you do. Most of the time, it's something that happens to you. We can now see that this is an old, complacent fairy tale. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The illusion of agency is so powerful that even strong incompatibilists will always act as if we had choices. We may be passengers in our body. What we call I think is most often a retrospective caption pasted onto a process already underway, a narrative label that arrives late to its own happening. The myth of the inner operator persists because it is phenomenologically convenient. It compresses the swarm of the subpersonal causes into a single speakable owner. Meta-awareness rises and falls like a tide. Autonomy is not the ocean, but the brief stillness in which one notices the ocean. The ebb and flow. The ebb and flow is not a defect apprehended to consciousness. The ebb and flow is not a defect appended to consciousness. It is the basal structure of minded life, in which goal directedness must compete with spontaneous self-modeled maintenance. If the majority of conscious life is not controlled, then the person as a whole is not the necessary locus of thought. The I becomes a site where processes disclose themselves, not a sovereign that originates them. The default mode network performs a kind of continuous housekeeping. Stitching yesterday, tomorrow, maintaining autobiographical continuity as if identity were an infrastructure requiring constant power. The self is less an entity than a platform kept online by narrative. Only a being that represents itself as the same across time can experience reward as for me, delay as worth it, risk as mine to bear, and guilt as my debt. Identity is not discovered, it is enacted as a necessary fiction that allows long horizon comportment. To plan is to believe in the persistence of the planner. To keep a promise is to presume a future bearer of the promise. The fiction of personal identity is not merely error, it is the enabling condition of responsibility, cooperation, and moral cognition as functional achievements. The seesaw between inner narratives and the here and now is not moral failure, it is systemic competition. Dasein's openness is multiplex. World disclosure can be seized by the task, the stimulus, the memory, the fantasy, the world, the worry, each a claimant to presence. There are episodes where consciousness cannot later say what occurred, because what occurred was not representational content but a gap in narratability. The world did not vanish, rather the self-model failed to stamp an episode with ownership and story. Sleep reveals the self as a user interface, not a ruler. We accept narrative coherence as truth because coherence is adaptive. It lets us move, but the felt obviousness of our reasons is often an afterimage of action initiated earlier, bodily, neural, situational. When choices precede consciousness, the conscious narrative becomes a diplomatic operation, manufacturing intelligibility, preserving the unity of the agent, protecting the social face. The ego is a governance layer, not the engine. To call agency an illusion is not to say it is useless. It may be the interface through which a deterministic or superpersonal system coordinates itself socially, learns norms, and anticipates consequences. If the mind is a computer made of meat, then the will is not a miracle but a process obeying physics. The feeling of choosing is not proof of freedom, it is a data point about how the system represents its own outputs. When society fears nihilism, it tries to preserve free will by redefining it, not because the phenomenon demands it, but because institutions depend on attribution. The word persists because punishment, praise, merit, guilt, and desert are socially expensive to dismantle. This is not moral impoverishment, it is a shift from sacred blame to pragmatic care for outcomes. In a deterministic picture, ethical life becomes less about metaphysical deserts and more about designing interventions that reduce harm and increase flourishing. If you cannot sustain political autonomy without training mental autonomy, because capture begins as attentional capture. If most cognition is default drift, then propaganda does not need to persuade. It only needs to steer wandering, implant saliences, seed narratives, manufacture popularity, occur the inner theater, occur, occupy, occur the inner theater. The political is first an economy of attention. Freedom is not primarily having reasons, but having breaks, being able to interrupt the runaway loop of rumination, worry, and compulsive storytelling. When inhibition fails, what appears is not interaction, but involuntary mental behavior, mind wandering as the breakdown mode. We will argue about platforms, notifications, feeds, workplace metrics, and pharmacologics, not as lifestyle, but as the architecture that determines how often agency can arise. A society that cannot cultivate meta-awareness will govern itself by drift. The cave sculpture in the dark, the painter before the canvas, the writer mid-sentence, each is an engineer of receptivity. Art becomes a disciplined hospitality towards the subpersonal, forms that allow the not yet owned to appear. To study art scientifically is not to reduce it to mechanisms. It is to map the affordances through which form seize attention, reorganize prediction, and stabilize memory. The risk is only scientism, the refusal to let the phenomena remain richer than its measurement. If autonomy is already fragile, then a society saturated with technique may slide into a regime where explanation is replaced by control and truth by performance metrics. Then the default mode of civilization becomes confabulations at scale. Facts hold within domains. When frames shift, they are not annihilated but resituated. The mind's hunger for binary certainty is itself a cognitive shortcut, useful but easily weaponized. The demand for finality is often a symptom of anxiety, not insight. A mature phenomenology of cognition learns to inhabit approximations without collapsing into relativism. remaining responsive to evidence while resisting the comfort of total closure.